Morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for our Monday call for community solutions hosted by the Forbes Funds and Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership. We've been offering this call since March of 2019, first as an emergency response to COVID, and then with the feedback from all of you, this has turned into a weekly policy and program update, along with hearing from guest speakers around the city who you request to learn things from. So far, since we started these calls, we've had over 5,100 meetings, engaging with over 44,000 people. So we do appreciate you joining us. Our guest for this morning is Miss Ashely Priore. She is an entrepreneur and nonprofit leader. She is the founder of the Queens Gambit in Queenside. And she's here working with the Forbes Funds this year as an extension on her youth leadership work. So we're happy to welcome Ashely and hear about her youth engagement and what she's up to this month and this quarter. As a reminder, we'll hear from Ashely for about 30 minutes. Please feel free to put your questions or comments into the chat. If there's something that you need to share privately or want to ask a question confidentially, you can send those to any member of the Forbes Funds team through a direct message. Brianna, Olivia, myself, Mary Jo. You can also send those directly to Ashely if needed. Okay, our objectives for today are to share resources and opportunities, provide space for the community to convene, and to better understand short-term and long-term community needs. As a reminder, we gauge impact at the Forbes Funds through two global metrics. One, the sustainable UN Sustainable Development Goals, and two, the known social determinants of health. The 8 R's are an internal aspect for gauging success and outcomes, and we use those internally as a measure to range our programs. Before we get into our conversation with Ashely, I just want to take a moment to introduce her. She does not need much introduction if you are from the Pittsburgh area. She is an American chess player, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and she currently serves as the founder, president, and CEO of Queens Gambit, which is a nonprofit, a national nonprofit elevating a new generation of strategic inclusivity. And she also works at Ashely Priore Enterprises, a national full-service strategic consulting firm. She's known as a strategist to the stars, world problem solver, and founder of chess-based strategic leadership training. And she works with many of Pittsburgh's leaders, athletes, and brands to achieve their goal and becoming a change maker. So we work with Ashely directly. I consider it an honor and love to work with her, and I'm excited to introduce her to those of you who haven't yet met her. I'm going to stop my share, and I know that Fred has joined us. Fred, before we pass it to Ashely, is there anything that you would like to share with us this morning?
Good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful day. I want to thank Ashely for being on in the team. I think we graduate, 40,000 kids a year from Southwestern PA, and 20,000 of them leave the day after graduation. If there's a way for the work that we do to build the bench, to restore the talent that's bleeding from our sector, I think Ashely's work and the other work of organizations serving young people is critically important, not from the standpoint of it being independently facilitated, but moreover from the integration of that work into an emerging ecosystem where there's some level of predictability about who might stay, who might go, and who stays. What do they need to stay? What are the things they need to be skilled up in that give them confidence to stay, that this is a place that they could benefit from staying. And so too much and too many of our kids leave here with this aspiration that it's better elsewhere. And I think it's incumbent upon us to create a different narrative. So I'm looking forward to Ashely's presentation. And like Hannah, I appreciate working with her wisdom, her insight, and what we hope to see is a emerging opportunity to really rebuild the sector, which I would say is building the bench. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Without any further delay, I'd like to welcome Ashely.
Yay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction and just for also, the kind words. I love working with the Forbes funds. I think it was back in 2018, I think, when I first got connected, and I've known, Olivia for a while. And it's just wonderful that there's this platform and organization working to uplift youth. And it was one of, the Forbes funds was one of those organizations that I felt that as a young entrepreneur I could go to for feedback, support, insight, and to continue to gain the skills that I needed, right, to thrive. So I love doing any sort of talk about chess or youth. And I always laugh because when people hear Queens Gambit, even after all these years, they always think of the miniseries, which is totally fine. And I get it. And I'm curious if you can give any sort of indication, whether in the chat or reactions, did you watch the miniseries? Did you enjoy it? Or is it something that you felt like, it was during COVID and, it just had this boom online? I'm just curious if anyone has watched it or how they felt about it. Interesting. Okay. We got some reactions here. Give everyone a minute. And as you're, responding, it was interesting, mixed feelings about it. So, it came out during COVID and there was a lot of debate in the chess world about it because, for so long we had grown up on Searching for Bobby Fischer or these other chess films that they were popular, but they weren't huge. And this just completely hit the world by storm, and it put chess, on the map in terms of a game that people thought it was interesting, right? They thought it had this new way of looking at it. And I would say that as a show, I enjoyed it, but I think that it needed a little bit more. And the reason I mentioned this to get into this conversation is because it aligns perfectly with what we do with Queen's Gambit. So, for those who haven't seen it, the show talks about Beth Harmon becoming this, incredible chess player and any obstacles that she had in that space. And it's fascinating to me because, when you look at the show itself, it was, written by a man, it was produced by a man, and it's all through the male lens. So I had a lot of, female grandmasters and friends who actually tried to advise on the film and the series, and they were denied that opportunity. And so when we did a little bit more digging before the show came out, it turned out that, everyone had a very specific way that they wanted the show to be told. And as I was watching it, I realized that it failed to really highlight what women go through in the chess community. Chess continues to be a very male-dominated game, but it continues to be a very white male-dominated game. And so I started Queen's Gambit in 2014 before the miniseries to get young people into chess. But I realized that a big part of this also has to do with making sure that we get more women in the game and we inspire women to, be a part of this game and take all of the wonderful tools that chess provides with it. So I liked it in one sense that it put, continue to put chess out there, but it just didn't highlight what it's like to be a woman in the game. Because, and even now we've seen this, women in the chess community, there's so many obstacles that we have to face, and there's continued to be a rise of sexual assaults for women at tournaments. And I think this is something that we need to talk about and continue to talk about. So I highlight that because you understand the scope of what we're talking about here. When we talk about chess, people assume that, oh, it's a game, they've had their own connections with it, or they say, oh, it's it's almost like too smart, or I don't really want to get into it. I never learned and I don't want to. And I've heard all of that. And for me, when I hear that, I think of, well, there's so many young people in Pittsburgh and beyond that are taking this game and they're using it to help themselves and their communities. So I want to touch on a bit about the work that's happening here. So Queens Gambit, we serve about 2,000 youth per year in grades 2 through 12. And there's two separate programs here. And the one I think is so special, and it highlights the work that the Forbes Funds is doing with youth leadership. You know, we do a lot of after school programs, and we talk about how chess is this tool for strategic leadership. You know, there's a lot of research that's been done that shows that when you play chess, the dendrites in your brain grow, and it leads to faster, smarter decision making. Okay. We know that can help with academics. We know that it can help with social emotional learning. We have the research behind chess. It's been proven and we have it, and we can show how young people are using this game. But what we don't talk about enough, I think, is how chess is a building block, right? It's a building block to other things. So when students go through the program, they're not going through it to just go into competitive chess. I did competitive chess for about 10 years and I loved it, but it is a intense journey, just like any other sport, right? There's a lot of this mental weight, right, when you're going through this game. So they can decide to go to the competitive side, but what we talk about is what else you can do with it. We had a student who I met him when he was in 5th grade. And when he first joined Queens Gambit, you know, he loved chess and he wanted to compete. And we spent a lot of the time, you know, playing together, but he was so quiet. Like he just would not talk, right? And I understand it. He was shy, but he felt like chess was a way that he could express himself. So when he was in 8th grade, I took him to an Amachi Pittsburgh chess class. And I asked him to co-lead it with me. And he was in 8th grade at this time. And the students themselves, they weren't fazed by an 8th grader teaching them chess. They loved it. They felt like there was this bonding, right? They felt like there was someone their age who can, you know, work with them and view them as an equal and play with them and engage. So they didn't mind, right, that it was an 8th grader. I remember having to pitch it to the administrators there. And at first they were like, well, how do you know that he's, you know, trained or can do this? And I said, I think that this could be a really interesting approach to teaching these kids chess. And so for the next couple of years, he went on to teach all around the city. He's currently teaching now. And we've seen his confidence just grow. Now he talks about chess nonstop, and he is one of the most talkative kids that you will ever meet, right? And chess helped him get there. And he always goes back to how chess was this way that he could express himself. It's not about becoming the best chess player out there. It's about how it led to this problem solving within him, that he could figure out where he wanted to be, moves ahead, right? Not only in the game, but in his own life. And so when we talk about chess as a building community, I want you to think about the chess games that you might see in New York. You know, you talk about chess in the parks, right? You can see people playing across all generations. I want you to think about, if you learned how to play chess, who taught you? Oftentimes I hear kids say, oh, my grandparents taught me how to play chess, right? Or my parents taught me how to play. You know, it's interesting to think about, because oftentimes we see this generational teaching of chess, right? It's the parents teaching the kids, right? Grandparents teaching the kids. And what Queen's Gambit is doing is that, you know, we love that and we want to keep that generational aspect going, but we also want to think about the intergenerational component, right? Intergenerational is very different than multi-generational. Intergenerational means that you're figuring out how to bring communities together, right? Across all different age groups. How do you bring them together? Multi-generational is just, you have different age groups, right? You have different generations in a room, perhaps, right? Inner is how they're working together. And so what we have is youth instructors, they're in grades 8 through 12, or they're in college, and they're interested in how chess can help them and their communities. So we have students that are going into the Hill District or Homewood, or the North Side, or in downtown and uptown. And they're figuring out how they can build community through chess. So they're working with schools, community centers, other nonprofits, right? And chess is the way to communicate between the leaders there. They reach out to a community leader and they say, can we talk about the work that's happening in the community? What are some obstacles that you're facing? And they have these conversations over a chessboard, right? And it's not even that chess is a tool that everyone knows how to play, right? That's not it. The youth are teaching the leaders, and they're saying, here's a really interesting thing about chess and how I think it can bring people together, right? When we think about all the work that we're being done in communities, one of the large things that Queens Gambit is facing now is, of course, women and girls in chess. I'll tell a little story about this, and I think it goes back to the intergenerational diversity component and how youth are trying to build this entire new movement into what it looks like to be a chess player. So back late last year, Jennifer Shahade, and if you don't know her, she is an amazing chess player. She is a women's world champion, a women's grandmaster. She's a commentator, she's a writer, she actually plays poker. And she talks a lot about how poker also helped her build some skills that she needs to thrive. And she used to work at US Chess, and her role was to promote women in the game, right? So she was the women's program director. I tell this story and I want to highlight first that, I'm going to be addressing some very serious topics in this story. So feel free to, add any comments in the chat, or if you're ever uncomfortable when I'm sharing this, feel free to, step away if it will make you comfortable. I'm happy to answer more questions. She was actually sexually assaulted by another grandmaster early on in her career. And nothing was very much done. Women have reported sexual assault at chess tournaments for years, and nothing was really done. Even when you went to, police reports and tried to take that next level of engagement, nothing was really done. And we don't know why. Sometimes it had to be with the evidence. Sometimes chess tournaments are done in schools or areas where there's but especially back in the 80s, there wasn't, the cameras or other ways to understand what was happening in the space. And so Jennifer, when she was sexually assaulted and she started working for US Chess actually wanted to bring in this grandmaster again to teach 100 girls how to play chess. And Jennifer said, you cannot have this happen. It is not safe. This should not happen. US Chess did not listen to her. US Chess is that big governing body. So if you wanted to go to a tournament, you would have to register with US Chess first. It's similar to like the NFL or the MLB, right? It's just that big governing body, right? Jennifer said, I'm not comfortable with that. You really shouldn't have that happen. They didn't listen, and a 13-year-old ended up being sexually assaulted at this event that he was hosting. And I share this because people always talk about almost like how chess is this great tool to build community, and it is, but we have to use it in the right way, and we have to make sure that women feel empowered. And another element that what Queens Gambit is doing is we're trying to create and advocate for safer, more inclusive environments. So, for example, we're working with and trying to get Pepperidge Farm to change chess. They call it chessmen cookies. You've probably seen them at the store. They're like those little cookies that have like the knight on them or whatever. They're called chessmen. How can we make it more gender inclusive? Just call it chess people or just chess cookies, right? So there's things that we're thinking about, right? How can we make sure that, the books at the library aren't just teach your dad how to play, beat your dad at chess, or all the covers on the books are just boys playing chess, right? We're trying to make sure that they're more inclusive because there are books out there that highlight women in chess, right? And Jennifer Shahade has a great book about that. And if you're interested in learning more about her, I'm happy to share because she's a wonderful advocate. She's actually, I believe, in Philadelphia. And exactly, yeah. So there's really great initiatives too with chess and people coming out of jail, and how chess is helping them build relationships again with the community. So there's lots of interesting things happening. So we work with so many schools in Pittsburgh, with Pittsburgh Public Schools or with nonprofits and organizations. And you can visit our website, of course, to see more of those groups. But the process of what we do to try to make sure that young people have access is that actually, if an organization applies to partner with us, the young people are the ones that help us choose how we're going to move forward with that partner. So our youth instructors are very influential in helping us decide which groups we partner with. So we work, recently we did something with the Homeless Children's Education Fund, with the Boys and Girls Clubs, with the Pittsburgh Project, really trying to show that chess is across all of these communities, right? So for me, what Queens Gambit is about is not just, oh, we're teaching kids chess. What we're doing is giving them a voice and power so that they can understand that they can do whatever they want to do to thrive, right? Chess is that building block. And anytime I'm talking about chess, I always mention there's some inaccessibility, right? Growing up, it would be like, so expensive to get chess lessons, right? So our programs are all free to youth and to their families and to our partners. So there is that inaccessibility in the chess community. And there's just so many things that we need to do to advocate for each other. So if we as Pittsburgh and as organizations within the city work together to understand how we can continue to empower youth so that they can take over this game and they can be the ones, at US Chess leading this work, that could be really, really exciting. So it's empowering youth to recognize their full potential. Understanding how youth can lead and do all this work in a really exciting way, right? And I'm glad someone mentioned, about 15, 20 years ago, a group of people would host chess matches in East Liberty. Yeah, in part to hold places against criminal activity. Really interesting work happening there. And there's also chess tables across the city. So if you went to, I think in Squirrel Hill, there's a cute area where there's some chess tables and work happening. So really interesting things taking place. Let's see in the chat here. I always like to make sure I'm responding to some community questions. How does chess help foster community collaboration among individuals, or is it primarily about competition among individuals? So that's the landscape that's changing a bit. If you asked me that question about 30 years ago, not that I was born, but I would say that there was popular among competitions. Chess was very competition based. That's what it was. But if you're looking at it now, it's changing and it's shifting because chess now is being used as a tool to help people. So outside of Queens Gambit, one of the things I'm working on is with athletes, especially players in the NFL, when you think about CTE and how chess can help these players thrive outside of football. We think a lot about, like, you have athletes and then the minute they retire, they're like, what do I do next? Chess is helping them figure out almost like their next move, right? So chess is slowly building into this community collaboration and community building rather than the competition. But there's still a lot of competitions out there. I mean, you look at like Magnus Carlsen, some of the greatest chess players in the world are still out there competing. Yeah, so there's some certainly matches being held periodically. A lot of what we do at Queens Gambit is focusing on the youth and the scholastic side, and youth are going to take those opportunities forward. So sometimes there's less work that we're doing with adults unless the youth in our community say, this is really a need and something that we think we need to build on. But if an organization reached out to us and said, can you partner with us to think about how we can do work with adults? We could certainly help, but that would be something we'd ask our youth instructors to sort of lead and help take that step forward. But yes, some really interesting work. Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned about intergenerational aspect here. Intergenerational needs to be talked about more, right? It's not something that is as in the spotlight as when you think of multi-generational or cross-generational. intergenerational is very different. And I'm glad that there can be some more. Thank you for providing that, additional information. And there's some interesting work happening in that space. And especially when you think about ageism. In Pittsburgh, we've gotten better, but we're trying to make sure that not only those who are under 25 have opportunities within nonprofits, but they also, have a voice across all decision-making bodies. We've certainly gotten better, but we still have a lot of work to go, right? See if I missed anything in the chat here. And certainly, in terms of contact, I'm happy to answer any questions or reach out to us. We have a really wonderful partnerships team at Queens Gambit. So if you email partnerships@qgchess.org, we will happy to get in touch and to really think about how we can work together. That I think would be the best way to somewhat, move forward and help craft really interesting classes and work. Let's see, other
Actually,
questions. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you again. I learn something new every time you talk, and I'm very interested in learning chess, as I know our team is. But can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with the Forbes funds through Queenside?
Absolutely. So last year, we did some work together, the Forbes funds and myself, around how can we get more youth, engaged at, the GPNP summit, and really thinking about the scope of youth engagement in Pittsburgh as it relates to nonprofits. And so what we're doing now is really thinking about how can we outline very clearly, one, how youth can engage with nonprofits, and how can the Forbes funds help facilitate that connection? Because I guarantee you, if you ask young leaders in Pittsburgh where they would go if they needed support with their organization, or if they reached out to other groups and they don't have a response, right? They feel very, not only disengaged, but they feel frustrated, right? So part of our work is to make sure that when youth reach out to us at the Forbes funds, they know where to go next. They have the resources that they need to take that forward and move to the next step here. Okay. The next is thinking about how the Forbes funds can create stronger relationships with our universities, and really think about our college presence here. Pittsburgh, so many wonderful college students looking to really make their next steps in the nonprofit space. So understanding, the Forbes funds is so positioned to help universities with this work, and think about how we can all work together in that sense. What I'm also really excited about is understanding areas of growth for nonprofits in the region, understanding that specific data as it comes to, youth serving organizations versus youth-led organizations, and understanding the numbers behind that. So like, what percentage of nonprofit organizations in Southwestern Pennsylvania have youth advisory boards? Or what percent of nonprofits have individuals, under 25 on their actual board of directors? Now I know, because I'm thankful for somebody mentioning this earlier. A couple of years ago, I remember we did a talk with the Forbes funds on one of these calls about youth engagement on boards, right? And of course, the legal aspect behind that, and each bylaw in each state is different when it comes to if young people can serve on boards. But the most important part is that even if your organization doesn't have the capacity right now to have a younger person on your board, please know, and this is something that the Forbes funds is very passionate about as well, is understanding that there are resources to help. If you have questions about how you can engage young people with your organization, that's where the Forbes funds can be so helpful, and really, take that to the next step, because it's so important. The question I get asked all the time is, why is it important for young people to be engaged in nonprofits? And sometimes that answer might seem obvious, but I think we need to go back to the pipeline of leadership and the pipeline of succession planning, right? So that pipeline of succession planning is so important, right? That pipeline meaning that we need to make sure that young people have a seat at the table, and they have a seat at that next that they understand that this is the work that they're leading and that they need to have a say. And a lot of the work that happens around, youth leaders, or youth engagement, young people aren't leading that. And that's why the Forbes Funds is different, because young people are leading this work. And that's what sets everything apart. And I think that's why it positions the Forbes Funds in such a great place. And I encourage everyone to, when you're thinking about intergenerational diversity, especially as it relates to, building more young people and providing more young people with opportunities in the region. Sometimes when we think about intergenerational, some generations are lost, right? We always think about like the older generations and not necessarily Gen Z. And I so encourage everyone to understand, one, how the generations work, the differences between the generations, and how we can move forward. One of my dear friends and a fellow Pittsburgh leader, her and I are actually starting a podcast about intergenerational diversity. And our goal is to help shine a light on what that means. And not just in the nonprofit space, but really when you look at the workforce, it's changing. And there needs to be more education on that. But the Forbes Funds is the way to understand how your organization can take that to the next step. So that's our long answer about what we're doing at the Forbes Funds.
I got a question.
Mhm.
Ashely, what would be your approach when you are working with special education students in which they consider slow learners? What would be your approach? Because this is a big opportunity for them. There's some that you all could work with them, get them involved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things that sets Queens Gambit apart too is that curriculum piece, right? So we get a lot of feedback, advice, and guidance from not only special educators, but those who work with students who are deaf, blind, hard of hearing, to make sure that our curriculum fits in and can be a way that they can, take that next step in their academic journey. We have so many students, and especially our instructors, who are either on the spectrum or who require additional resources. And so they help advise us on that curriculum and say, this is when you're going to, this is where we need a little bit more extra help. This is when we need to move forward. This is where we might need to spend a little bit more time. The thing about chess is that for so long, it was taught in just one way. It was like, you learn how the pieces move, you learn about the board, you learn maybe a few strategies, and then you go out and play. It's not that easy. And it's something that we really need to make sure that we slow it down, right? And you take each step more slowly. This weekend, actually, the Pittsburgh Cultural Trust had their Children's Theater Festival. If anyone had attended, it was a wonderful time. And we worked with a lot of students. We had a table and kids came over, and there was families that were talking about how chess had helped their kids really build the skills that they needed, because it was something where they felt like there was like no one answer, and that really helped them. And there was a student that was on the spectrum, and they were saying how they appreciated that they could look at a piece and draw a comparison with their own life. So if you looked at like a pond, for example, they were like, oh, that piece looks like a snowman, right? And they were talking about the building blocks of a snowman and how that reminds them of like how how a piece moves. So there's some really interesting connections. So we're proud that our curriculum can be able to provide that. But I always say we always want advice and feedback. So if you have colleagues or recommendations for anyone that we can continue to connect with about how we can make our programming and curriculum more accessible, we would love to hear it, because I think chess can do some really special things when it comes to supporting students at all walks of life. And also, there was some really interesting research around how chess helped with Alzheimer's. So if you're interested in any of that, there's some really great work around there.
Thank you, Ashely. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning. I do want to ask if there are any additional questions for Ashely. You can come off mute, or you can put those in the chat. And I see Ashely put both her email address and then her organization's website address there in the chat as well. Yes, great. You can continue asking questions for Ashely, and as we mentioned, Ashely and us are working together very closely. So if there is a youth capacity building or a question that you have about anything that she talked about, please let us know, and we would be happy to meet with you. I am going to transition back into our presentation here and talk briefly about our policy updates. I know that my team is also sharing the weekly survey. So as I take a moment to get my screen up, please go ahead and answer those. They're very helpful as we continue to make this call for you all. Okay. So like I mentioned, into a public policy update, I'm going to do this on behalf of Emily. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them. And if it's something I can't answer, I will make sure Emily gets back to you. We are having a public policy meeting through the Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership next Thursday, May 23rd, or no, this Thursday, May 23rd. Wow, May is going fast. So that's from 1 to 2. Anybody is welcome to join. I'll make sure that my team gets that reservation link into the chat, but you'll be talking about the Appropriations Committee from the state budget proposal, as well as Governor Shapiro's budget proposal and any funding updates for the 2024-2025 cycle. A little bit about the Public Policy Committee state budget. We are asking that you convene with us. You can join regional change makers, government officials, sector advocates, and more every third Thursday of the month via Zoom. That's for our public policy meetings. You can also join peers in the sector to help advocate or learn how to advocate for your organization. That's a major impetus for the Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership, is not only to advocate, but to enable and build the capacity for organizations and communities to advocate on their own as well. And just as a reminder, if you miss any of these calls, these Monday morning calls or the public policy calls, you can find those on our YouTube channel at the Forbes Funds. You can also find a link on our website as well. I want to close out by thanking you all for being here with us. We have a couple upcoming speakers or topics for the next coming weeks, and again, are very interested in hearing from you about what you need to learn. And we're happy to make those connections, but we'll talk more about youth leadership at the regional and state level. We'll talk about Allegheny County's decarbonization campaign, and then our AI cohort and updates. Thank you again for joining us. I am going to close our call. And I will ask, as we're getting off, if there are any updates from my team in terms of programming. You may mention them now.